Okay. So what I want to do today is backgrounds. Backgrounds are a lazy animator's biggest enemy, but also a lazy animator's biggest potential. If you make an interesting enough background, people have more to look at. And if they have more to look at, you don't need to animate too much. And there'll also be like content looking around at the background. There's a balance. You don't want it to be too distracting. Let's just scroll through some files and we'll see, we'll take a look. This illustration turned into a short, but I like making illustrations like this that already kind of indicate like a bit of a scene. So this is the background that I actually eventually used. As you can see, I kind of slapped them there. So I kind of blocked everything out, like focusing on the fact that they're going to be sitting there at some point. There needs to be enough detail there to make that shot look interesting, but I also don't want it to be too distracting. So I kind of block that out, add some nice foreground elements to give it some depth. I didn't want too much detail there either, so it wouldn't be too distracting from the action at that point. Crappy 1-point perspective here that I didn't really inked. Oh, and I accidentally put stuff on the wrong layer as well. Some simple colors. I just took them from the illustration I already had. Tried to stay in a similar color palette. The car is obviously a bit of a different color with some exceptions. Here, the grass. A little bit of texture, nothing too wild. Gives it a little bit more life, And with the light. So like there are simple things like adding this little bit of texture. If you zoom in, it looks terrible. But if you see it in the animated thing itself, it looks fine, and just this little bit of color hold that it's not that impressive, but it just gives it a little bit more depth. Orange grass and blue because of these characters. Sometimes I surprise myself. I just used a stock photo. I'm an idiot, so I did not do layers for this. So I just took like a stock, I painted over a little bit over the details. It looks terrible, but I think it works eventually because the character is on top of you anyway, so the details don't really matter that much. Figure out where your characters are at and where your camera is going to be at, so you know what parts need detail and what parts don't need detail. Another one of these shorts is about a character, a fancy man in a mansion. I don't even remember.
Everything used to be so much better.
A little bit more difficult background, but what I did here, again, I used free stock imagery to just kind of photo bash something together, because drawing something like this would have been a pain in the ass. So if you can get away with it, photo bash something together. So the image of this, and that's a cool looking sky from free this. Just look at free stock photography websites and just mash it together, and then it doesn't take as much time as drawing it. And that's a really good way to do it if you're as lazy as me. I made sure to have the same sky, so there's like a continuing thing. Found some stock pattern, remove everything that I didn't need, and then slap this sky from the other scene, and it just really works well together. And it's very lazy, and it can work very well. I tried something else with this that was not that lazy. So initially in the storyboard, I did most of the backgrounds in Adobe Animate. So in the storyboards, you can kind of see that I've really tried to focus on what parts I did and didn't need for the shots. So I added a 1-point perspective, a very rough sketch of the location, and then I just went into the widest shot I had and made a vector drawing of all the thingies. In the eventual animation, I cleaned it up, and in the eventual animation, I actually animated the entire short in the wide angle and then added the camera movements in post. Go to Photoshop anyway, so what I did was I added the wide shot that I animated everything in, and I just messed around a little bit. I just played around with the environment around it. It's very similar to the first example I showed, where I just went with like the least possible things. I found a stock photo of an airplane because airplanes are difficult to draw. The rubble, some free stock photos that I used as a reference. A little bit of texture goes a long way, and it really works very well because it sets the atmosphere. The original background, the original Sossageman short, so I knew that if I would put like half a day into the background, it would save me time in the animation because there would just be so much to see, and it would already feel so lively because I really wanted the character to feel grounded in the world, a world that made sense. So I took a lot of reference material, which helped a lot already. But I made sure to think about the relationship of Sossageman to the world. So I made sure he was in the scene as well. This is also like the end resolution of the thing. So I knew that this part of the thing had to look pleasant by itself, and everything beyond it, it matters, but it matters less because you won't see it as much and as long. This is the part that we're going to be focusing on constantly. That's why this is in here. Like the roof is pretty bare. All these foreground elements kind of suck, honestly, but it doesn't matter. Again, I started off with a 1-point perspective, a pretty extreme one. I had the character in here the entire time to keep track of his relationship to the environment. As you can see, I just probably found a brick texture online and slapped it over it, so I didn't have to deal with that. Just as a reference for the sketch, I used something somebody else already did. Then I slapped on some simple inks, but because of the detail, it already looks super alive. Flat colors. I think I probably started with the shadow, so what I sometimes often do, copy the basic color layer, and I go to adjustment, hue, saturation, and I just make it darker and often a little bit more saturated. Completely black first, and then I mask out the places where I want to have the shadow, or mask in. I don't know how you would say that, but and add some white. And then everything is already shaded in a blurred, royalty-free photograph. For the background, I added some extra shadow with just a solid color set to multiply. Some reflection of this textures that I found just to give it a little bit more light. And then you don't have to draw all the details. For some styles, I know it's fun to do, but I'm lazy. I don't want to draw the wood grain, but I still want you to feel like there is wood grain. So I just find some texture and just mess with it. That's how the first background is. I started again with perspective, did a little sketch. You can see that something's gonna happen with the ground here. Again, I always use very heavy foreground elements and background elements to try to create that. Even though I'm very lazy and I don't like spending a lot of time with it, spending more time on a background like this saves me time animating in this case because it's already fun to look at. So you don't need to also make the animation fun to look at. Of course, if you are not lazy and you are capable and you want to have more happen in the animation, you can do it. I'm just showing you my lazy way of doing it and how I can get away with doing very little. And that's by investing my time wisely, I think. I had troubles with the ground at some point. I did that on a separate layer. Flat colors. Found a royalty-free photograph of the sky. Look, that's beautiful. But it doesn't fade in quite the way I want to have it fade in. So what I did was add a little bit of a gradient on top of it. Some royalty-free photographs of different type of food. It all fades into each other very nicely. The details in the background really make a world feel real and alive. And I'm not good at backgrounds. I'm not great at it. Something I struggle with. So sometimes stuff like this happens where I really try to sketch out. I'm like, okay, there's the grid, there's the sketch. It feels pretty good. Gonna be blend there, blah, blah, blah. And then I get going. I ink it, flat colors. It's probably gonna be fine. And it just didn't feel right. Might be personal. You might be looking at this right now and think like, oh, you're crazy. This is a perfectly fine background. It just didn't feel right for me. So what I did was I copied all of these. I copied all these layers and then I blurred it and I put a mask on top of it. And this already feels way more like there is a deliberate choice. So that's also one of the things, right? So one of the things that things in general feel good is specificness and deliberateness. So now I think it looks nice because it looks a little bit more deliberate. The grid, the sketch on the grid. I messed up the floor. But it's all right. There's a separate layer for the floor. Flat colors, shade. Just copied the flat color layer, made it a little darker. Royalty-free photo on the far background. Added some details. Brown elements really pop out. I do this. Texture, separate thing for that glass. Gradient with the foreground element masked out. Nice. I like this. This is one of maybe one of my favorite backgrounds. The perspective, the sketch, the inks, flat colors. I used a single color layer. I also did a little bit with the shade where I did the darker thing, just to give it a little bit texture. Like it just looks a little. I think it's easier to have a bit of a textured shading if you do it that way. Noise in the background. Some reflection. I just copied this and flipped it and blurred it, and then I added like an overlay. Nothing fancy. Oh, this is a reference image. References make things easier as well. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of how I put together my lazy backgrounds. I don't feel like this was clear at all.